Welcome back to Diabetic Foot Files. Happy Sunday. It's nice and cold. And today we're going to talk about iodine being cytotoxic, where they got this idea from, because I heard a very interesting thing told by a healthcare professional who said that they were specializing in wound care, and I don't think they do because they said that they do not use iodine on wet gangrene. They're saying that their protocol, and I mean, like everybody has their own protocol, but yeah, all my years of studying, I have yet to hear this one. And yeah, it may work, but they were saying iodine is cytotoxic. And so I said, what do y'all use? And she's like, well, we soak the gauze in alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, and put it on the wet gangrene. Now, if anybody said that they've heard this method and it works very well, tell me. But I've yet to hear about that, and I was like, I think alcohol is more cytotoxic, in my opinion. And povidone iodine is completely different from just the free radical released iodine. But, there's people going out there doing that on people's wet gangrene, which is absolutely crazy, right? But and I'm like, you're not even you didn't even go to medical school for this. So I'm kind of confused why you're telling patients that to do that. But whatever. But we're gonna go into this because to each his own, but I don't like if you're giving people misinformation, and misinformation is just going to cause more harm because I have yet to hear about that. I get it. Everybody has their own method. But in my opinion, I would think that putting isopropyl alcohol on wet gangrene is so bizarre in my head. And I would think that that's incredibly cytotoxic. And I think that would cause more harm than good compared to just putting iodine, which will keep the area stable, strong antiseptic. Yes, alcohol is dehydrating, but let's just get into it, okay? So yeah, everybody always says like, "Oh, iodine is cytotoxic," but I'm like, "Yeah, but also infection is cytotoxic." Yeah. So, yeah, which one? Let's just do the thing that kills the bacteria, right? So, iodine kills they say, "What do you mean cytotoxic?" Right? Saying that the iodine kills healing cells, but honestly, the proof is in the pudding. Iodine works fantastic, okay? So, this period of believing like iodine is cytotoxic, and it does have its own cytotoxic properties to an extent, but it still works very well in wound healing, okay? But the belief comes from old lab studies, not from real wounds now. And the original myth of this came from like the 1970s and 1990s, and researchers tested antiseptics on the fibroblasts, which we need, the keratinocytes, and the endothelial cells, not in and these are in petri dishes, not in the blood, not in proteins, not in the immune system, and no tissue buffering, right? And they found that when they poured high concentrations of free iodine directly on these isolated cells, yes, these cells died. But and that's where they came with this conclusion that iodine is cytotoxic, therefore it's bad for wounds, but it's not. Okay, I can definitely say with all my whole heart that it's not because the proof is in the pudding. I use iodine all the time. I've seen wounds heal fantastic wise, okay? And the thing about iodine, which is great, is very cost effective, okay? But the leap, there's a major flaw in when they came to this conclusion. The wound is not a petri dish, okay? That's the fact of the matter is the wound is not a petri dish. In the real world, in a real wound, right? You have serum proteins, you have extracellular matrix, you have necrotic tissue, you have bacteria, you have enzymes, you have fluid dynamics. And these bind and buffer iodine and dramatically lower the concentration of free iodine that actually touches the viable tissue. So, the mechanisms of iodine and why it works so well. So, decades ago, early lab studies used high concentrations, direct fibroblast cultures, nothing with blood flow, no tissue buffering. And these concentrations, iodine did slow fibroblast growth in a petri dish. A petri dish, a petri dish. I'm going to say it again. But a wound is not a petri dish, okay? Modern wound care uses controlled release formulations that behave completely differently, okay? And the chemistry of it is completely simple but yet powerful. What is iodine? It's like I2, right? That's the chemical structure of it. So it's a small halogen molecule. It's highly reactive, it loves electrons, and it disrupts the proteins and the enzymes and the microbial membrane. But raw iodine can be irritating. But modern medicine uses providone, provivi- providine iodine. Okay, that's what we see when we buy in the pharmacy, right? The providine iodine, the PVPI, right? And this is a complex called polyvinyl pyro iodine, that's the carrier, and elemental iodine. And this acts as a slow release iodine delivery system compared to free iodine. Okay. So the free iodine in the providine iodine is released gradually and it has an antimicrobial effect without causing tissue burn. So, how does iodine kill microbes but spares tissue? Iodine oxidizes bacterial proteins, disrupts the cell walls, denatures the enzymes, inactivates viruses even, penetrates biofilms. But human cells have what we have is an antioxidant system. We have blood flow because human cells survive in the blood flow, and we have a tissue buffering. So, at therapeutic levels, the bacteria dies first. And iodine isn't a poison to the wound, it's just a rapid microbe destroyer. So how does iodine, you know, penetrate and kill the pathogens? Like I said, it penetrates the microbes and iodinates the amino acids. So like they cause tyrosine residues. And then it oxidizes the proteins, it disrupts the cell membranes, it activates enzymes and damages the nucleotides, which is like the DNA. But what is the result of all that? Bacterial, fungus, viruses, spores, all gone because of iodine. See, that's why I love iodine. It's like one-stop shop, kills it, and it's so cost effective, okay? It does not rely on a single target, and that's why resistance to iodine is also extremely rare. So, I mean, why not love iodine, okay? So, modern iodine, which is providine iodine, is not cytotoxic in wounds, okay? There is a difference in its delivery system. The old thinking was free iodine is hard, and free iodine is. But modern iodine is povidone iodine, which is a controlled, slow release iodine. So, povidone iodine carrier reduces free iodine spikes, it keeps levels antimicrobial, and it prevents tissue injury. And in real wounds, iodine reduces the bacterial bioburden, it decreases biofilm, it lowers inflammation, it controls odor, it reduces protease overload, and creates a cleaner healing environment. And wound studies, actual wound models show that healing rates are not impaired with providine iodine. And sometimes they improve because the infection control outweighs any minimal cellular stress that is caused by it. So in infected or critically colonized wounds, bacteria are more harmful than fibroblasts. The bacteria is more harmful to the fibroblast than iodine could ever be to the actual wound. Okay. So why cytotoxicity and lab cytotoxicity does not equal clinical cytotoxicity. Okay. So lab study, like I said, it was direct exposure to these cells. These cells aren't buffered in the fluid dynamics in the blood. These are just in a petri dish. In real world, the wound has its own buffering and it has proteins and fluids and things like that. In a lab, there's no tissue structure. You have to remember every wound has its own tissue structure, extracellular matrix. It's a complex matrix in itself. Lab study, it was just free, high concentrations of free iodine. Real world, it's providine iodine is a controlled release iodine. Okay. Lab study, there would be no infection present. In real wound, the infection is damaging the cells more. So the old conclusion that iodine is cytotoxic can be clinically misleading. And that's why I know when people say that, I'm like, "You're obviously not really doing your research, and you're obviously just being kinda, like, narrow-minded, in my opinion, because you're not." First of all, the proof is in the pudding. I see it in myself. It works fantastic on wounds, okay? Especially when it's resource limited. But the fact of the matter is that somebody just saying it's cytotoxic, and I'm like, "So when's the last time you read a research paper? When's the last time you understand what's going even on in there?" And then on top of that, why are you soaking wounds in isopropyl alcohol? Who does that? I mean, I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but who actually does that? I've yet to hear about that. With all the studying, I've never heard about that in my life yet, okay? So is alcohol, isopropyl alcohol that they use, is it cytotoxic? Yes. Alcohol is much more cytotoxic than iodine in open wounds. That's why you don't see us treating wounds with ethanol isopropyl alcohol. Okay. So I'm like, where did this person have the audacity to even tell me something like that and think that that's better on a wet gangrenous wound? That's crazy, right? So alcohol, ethanol or isopropyl alcohol. The mechanism, alcohol, it rapidly causes protein denaturation. It causes lipid membrane destruction and it causes dehydration of the cells. Okay. And on top of that, alcohol does not distinguish between bacteria, doesn't distinguish between the fibroblasts, does not distinguish between endothelial cells. It kills everything fast, including healing tissue. But alcohol impairs epithelial cells, slows fibroblast activities, drives wound beds, and causes pain and tissue stress. So, ironically, the antiseptic many think is gentle is actually more cytotoxic to healing cells than modern iodine preparations. Okay. So, why does modern iodine safer today? Because the modern formulation today is a controlled iodine release. It lowers free iodine levels. It is a broad spectrum antimicrobial. It is effective against biofilm and it has anti inflammatory properties and it actually promotes healthy granulation when used properly. Okay. Studies have shown no significant delay in healing when used appropriately. So, why does this matter in diabetic foot ulcers or even wounds, in my opinion? These wounds that already have poor perfusion, high chronic inflammation, and high bacterial burden, you need an antimicrobial that will kill the biofilm, work well on ischemic tissue, and doesn't destroy the fragile granulation tissue. And iodine, povidone iodine, fits that profile better than alcohol. Okay. So the mechanism, like we said, that alcohol denatures the protein, it dissolves lipids, it disrupts the cell membrane, and dehydrates the tissue. Okay. And this is happening to all the tissue, not just the bacteria. So alcohol has no buffering carrier. Is a quite blunt chemical weapon. So alcohol, it works great for intact skin, but iodine is good for contaminated wounds. Alcohol kills fast, kills almost anything fast, but iodine is broad spectrum. Alcohol, remember, it evaporates very quickly. Iodine has a sustained action. Alcohol has high tissue toxicity, and iodine has a controlled tissue exposure. So you should never put alcohol on open wound. You shouldn't. It's going to be extremely painful as well for the patient. But iodine, when used appropriately, can help with a patient with high infection risk. So let's just balance infection versus cytotoxicity. So uncontrolled bacteria will release toxins, activate the MMPs, destroys the extracellular matrix, kill fibroblasts, prolong inflammation. So the question isn't does iodine slightly stress the cells? The question is iodine less harmful than the bacterial overload? And the answer in an infective wound is yes by far. So, modern wound care perspective, we don't avoid iodine anymore because biofilm is a major barrier when it comes to healing. Infection delays granulation, and proteases imbalance destroys tissue. And iodine helps reset the wound environment. And it's not about that whole concept of like never use antiseptics. It's about using them strategically. Okay. So that's why knowledge is power. So use it when there's early infection, if there's a critically colonized wound, if the wound is odorous, if there's a biofilm management. But every wound care specialist is different. But The alcohol thing, putting it on an open wound, that is absolutely bizarre to me, okay? Yet never learned that ever in my life. So for somebody to go around telling people that, especially for patients that have high risk limbs, yeah, please don't do that. No, no, misinformation, absolutely not. Okay. And the whole thing about wound care is not about us as the provider, it's not about our egos, it's about patient. So let's not make it about us or feel like lesser than just because somebody's telling you something different. You should hear both perspectives. And then on top of that, you should research it and be like, oh, maybe I am wrong, right? Because that's a possibility. So it's always good to learn, okay, and not take it to personal. You should try to be the best that you can possibly be. So, yes, iodine can be cytotoxic, but that's an oversimplified, outdated statement based on artificial lab conditions. And reality is, free iodine at high concentrations can damage cells. Povidone iodine in wounds is antimicrobial and controlled and clinically safe. Alcohol far more destructive on open wounds, and you shouldn't use it. And in limb salvage, infection control saves more tissue than theoretical cytotoxicity can ever do. So, saying iodine kills wounds, no, it doesn't. Infection does. So hopefully modern iodine will help us win this fight against amputation, help us save some limbs. And that's why I am one of the biggest fans for iodine. Okay. I always keep iodine on me. So let's do some quick questions, high yield questions. And I know sound like I'm a little out of breath. It is quite cold today. So what is the active antimicrobial component released from povidone iodine? The answer is free elemental iodine, I2. How does iodine primarily kill microorganisms? It kills microorganisms by oxidizing the proteins and the enzymes, disrupting the microbial cell walls and the metabolic pathways. Why is modern povidone iodine less cytotoxic than the historical iodine preparations? Answer is it uses slow release carrier systems that lower free iodine concentrations at tissue. Which antiseptic is more likely to impair fibroblasts and keratinocyte function in an open wound? Iodine or alcohol? Alcohol. Alcohol exerts antimicrobial effects through which mechanism? Rapid protein denaturation and lipid membrane dissolution. Why can alcohol delay wound healing? Because it damages viable epithelial cells, fibroblasts, and endothelial cells. Iodine is especially useful in chronic wounds because it is effective against which major barrier to healing? Biofilm. It works great with biofilm. What property of iodine allows it to work in ischemic and low oxygen wounds? Its antimicrobial action does not depend on the host immune function or oxygen levels. What is the key difference between iodine and alcohol regarding the tissue selectivity? Iodine is more selective towards microbes at a therapeutic dose, while alcohol is non selective and damages host tissue. Why did early studies label iodine as cytotoxic? Because high concentrations were tested on isolated cells in vitro without tissue buffering or blood flow present. Which antiseptic is more likely to dry out or desiccate wound tissue? Alcohol. What type of microbes does iodine cover? It covers bacteria, gram negative, gram positive. It covers fungi. It even covers viruses. It even covers spores. Which antiseptic has stronger activity against mature biofilm in chronic wounds? Iodine. What role is polyvinyl pyroiodine in povidone iodine? It acts as the carrier that stabilizes the iodine and controls its release. In diabetic foot ulcers, why is iodine preferred over alcohol? Because iodine reduces the bioburden and the biofilm without damaging fragile granulation tissue. Which antiseptic is appropriate for routine use in open wounds due to tissue toxicity? Alcohol. Iodine's antimicrobial action is best described as what type of chemical effect? Oxidative and protein denaturing. Which antiseptic, causes more pain when applied to open wound. I think everybody knows this. Alcohol. Like if anybody got a scratch, when they get alcohol on their wound, they start screaming. It's so painful, it burns. Does modern povidone iodine significantly delays wound healing when used appropriately? It doesn't. It doesn't delay wound healing. And the belief that iodine is harmful to wounds is largely based on what type of study. It was largely based on early in vitro cytotoxicity studies using high concentration of free iodine. Okay, this is not the type of iodine that we use today. Okay, that is controlled release. But I hope everybody liked this episode of Diabetic Foot Files. This is Dr. G, and take care of your feet because they take care of you, and stay educated, informed, and read research papers, please. Bye.